The crisp, white tablecloth felt like a surrender flag between them. On one side sat Kevin, his posture perfect, his smile as sharp and cold as the crease in his trousers. On the other was Chloe, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was supposed to be their anniversary dinner at Per Se, a place she'd only dreamed of. But as he slid the small velvet box across the table, not a ring box but something flatter, her dream curdled into a nightmare. He didn't say, "I love you." He said, "I think we need to be realistic." With those 6 words, her world didn't just crumble. It was systematically dismantled right there under the glittering chandeliers of a life she was never meant to have. He thought she was nothing. And for a long time she believed him. But he never imagined that from the ashes of her humiliation a queen would rise, and that one day he'd be the one begging on his knees. The air in Per Se was thick with the scent of money and truffles. It was an atmosphere Chloe Jensen had never grown accustomed to, despite 3 years with Kevin Moss. For him, it was native air. For her, it always felt like she was holding her breath, waiting to be found out as an imposter. Kevin adjusted the cuffs of his Zegna shirt. "Chloe," he began, his voice a carefully modulated baritone he'd practiced for boardrooms. "We've had a good run. A great run, even. A run. Like a race. Like something that inevitably has a finish line." Chloe's hands, which had been clutching her napkin in her lap, went cold. She looked at the box on the table. It wasn't a ring. It was too rectangular. "You've been wonderful," he continued, the word landing with the weight of a consolation prize. "But my career is at a pivotal stage. The partners at Goldman, they're watching. The circles I'm moving in, the people I'm networking with, it's a different league." She stared at him, her mind struggling to connect the dots. "What does that have to do with us?" she asked, her voice, a small, fragile thing in the grand dining room. He sighed, a sound of profound theatrical patience. He opened the box for her. Inside, nestled on black satin, was a delicate but clearly not extravagantly expensive silver bracelet. A severance package. "I need a partner who fits," he said, avoiding her eyes and looking out at the panoramic view of Columbus Circle. "Someone who understands the nuances of that world. Brittany, for instance. You remember Brittany Vandersloot from the charity gala. Her family has a seat on the exchange. She gets it. She doesn't have to try." The implication was a slap in the face. Chloe, with her freelance graphic design career, her sensible apartment in Astoria, and her portfolio full of passion projects for nonprofits and local businesses, was trying too hard and failing. She was a project, not a partner. "So, you're breaking up with me," she whispered, the clatter of silverware from a nearby table suddenly deafening. "Here, on our anniversary, I thought it would be more civilized," he said, as if bestowing a kindness. "A beautiful memory to close the chapter." He pushed the bracelet box closer. "Please, take it. A token of my appreciation for your time." Your time? Like she was a contractor whose project had ended. Humiliation, hot and acidic, rose in her throat. She looked from his perfectly coiffed hair to his dismissive smirk, and saw him for the first time a hollow man constructed from brand names and ambition. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the polished floor. Heads turned. "No, thank you, Kevin," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I don't need a participation trophy for having loved you." She turned and walked away past the curious stares of the other diners, through the hushed elegance of the restaurant, and out into the cool night air. She didn't look back. The tears started the moment the doorman hailed her a cab, a silent, scalding river that tracked the path of her broken heart. The weeks that followed were a blur of grey. Kevin, ever efficient, had her belongings boxed up and delivered by courier. He was already publicly dating Brittany. Their photos splashed across the society pages of online magazines, laughing at a polo match in the Hamptons, looking elegant at the New York City Ballet. The captions praised them as the city's new power couple. Chloe, meanwhile, felt powerless. She sublet her small Astoria studio and moved into a tiny fifth-floor walk-up in the East Village. Her freelance work, once a source of pride, now felt trivial. Kevin's words echoed in her mind. She doesn't have to try. Chloe felt like all she ever did was try. She poured her soul into her designs, her unique blend of minimalist aesthetics and bold emotional typography. But to men like Kevin, it was just scribbling. It wasn't a family legacy or a trust fund. It was nothing. Her confidence, already a fragile construct, was shattered. She started taking on cheap, uninspired gigs from content mills, designing logos for $10, formatting ebooks for pennies a page. It was mindless work that paid just enough to cover rent and ramen. She was drowning, and the worst part was she believed she deserved it. Kevin had held up a mirror, and she had accepted his reflection of her as the truth. A girl who was nice enough, but ultimately not enough. A stepping stone now submerged and forgotten as he walked toward his glorious future. She was nothing. 6 months after the breakup, Chloe's world had shrunk to the size of her 15-inch laptop screen. Her apartment was a chaotic mess of empty coffee cups, design books she no longer opened, and a persistent feeling of failure. She was working on another soul-crushing project, designing a new menu for a small, struggling coffee shop in Soho called The Daily Grind. The pay was abysmal, but the owner, a kind old man named Sal, had promised her free coffee for a month, and at this point that felt like a fortune. She sat at a small table in the corner of the cafe, making final adjustments on her laptop. The design was actually something she was proud of, a rare flicker of her old self. She'd used a warm, inviting color palette and created a custom hand-drawn font that felt both modern and timeless. It was far better than what Sal was paying for, but she couldn't bring herself to deliver substandard work. It was the only piece of her identity she had left. The bell above the door chimed, and a man walked in who seemed to instantly alter the room's atmosphere. He wasn't loud or flashy, quite the opposite. He was dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored dark grey suit with no tie, his quiet confidence a stark contrast to the performative arrogance she was used to from Kevin's world. He had a calm, observant intensity, his eyes scanning the room before settling on the menu board behind the counter. He ordered a black Americano, his voice low and steady. While Sal prepared the coffee, the man's gaze drifted around the small shop, eventually landing on the prototype menu Chloe had left on her table. He walked over his movements fluid and unhurried. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was even more resonant up close. "Is this your work?" Chloe looked up, startled. "Oh, yes it is. It's just a draft for Sal." He picked it up, his long fingers handling the cardstock with a surprising delicacy. He didn't just glance at it, he studied it. He ran a thumb over the custom font, his brow furrowed in concentration. For a full minute he said nothing. Chloe's anxiety spiked. Was he going to critique it? Tell her the kerning was off. "The balance is exceptional," he finally said, looking at her directly for the first time. His eyes were a startlingly clear shade of blue, intelligent and piercing. "You've captured a sense of established tradition while still feeling completely fresh. The font choice, it's proprietary." Chloe blinked, stunned. No one had ever analyzed her work with such precision. I drew it myself. I wanted it to feel personal to the cafe." "You have a remarkable eye," he stated, not as a compliment, but as a fact. "Most designers would have just used a stock font, collected their fee, and moved on. This has integrity." He placed the menu back on the table. Sal called out that his coffee was ready. The man nodded to her, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He paid for his drink, and as he was about to leave, he paused and walked back to her table. He pulled a sleek, heavy card from his wallet. It was black with minimalist silver lettering. Nathaniel Caldwell, founder and CEO, Caldwell Ventures. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Even she knew that name. Caldwell Ventures was one of the most powerful and secretive venture capital firms in the world. They didn't invest in companies. They built empires. Nathaniel Caldwell was a legend, a so-called kingmaker in the tech and branding worlds, known for being ruthlessly brilliant and intensely private. He was almost a ghost, rarely photographed, never interviewed. "My firm is always looking for talent with vision," he said, placing the card next to her laptop. "People who don't cut corners. If you're ever interested in working on projects with a bit more scale than a coffee shop menu, my office knows how to find me." And with that, he was gone. Chloe stared at the card. The thick, matte finish felt impossibly luxurious in her hands. It was absurd. It had to be a mistake or a prank. A man like Nathaniel Caldwell, a titan of industry, noticing her work in a dingy coffee shop. It was the stuff of fantasy. For 3 days, the card sat on her desk, a stark black rectangle in her sea of mediocrity. Her mind raced with self-doubt. It was a fluke. He was just being polite. He gives these cards to everyone. If she called, his secretary would laugh at her. Kevin's voice returned, whispering in her ear, "You're out of your league. Don't embarrass yourself." On the 4th day, as she was about to accept another mind-numbing gig creating banner ads for a cat food brand, she looked at the card again. Integrity. He had said her work had integrity. No one, not even Kevin, had ever used that word to describe her or what she did. With a surge of desperation that felt terrifyingly like hope, she picked up her phone. She typed out an email, her fingers shaking so badly she had to start over 3 times. It was short and professional, simply stating her name, where they had met, and attaching a link to her online portfolio, the one she hadn't updated in months, the one filled with the work she did before she started believing she was nothing. She hit send and immediately felt a wave of nausea. She had just made a fool of herself. 24 hours passed with no reply. Then 48. The silence confirmed her fears. It was a fluke. She was an idiot. She closed her laptop, ready to resign herself to a lifetime of cat food ads. Just then her phone buzzed. An email. From Audrey Finch, a Finch at Caldwell. Ventures. Subject your portfolio, Ms. Jensen. Mr. Caldwell has reviewed your portfolio. He has a portfolio company, a biotech startup called Viridian Dynamics, that is in desperate need of a full brand overhaul before their Series B funding round. The current branding is, in his words, an unmitigated disaster. He believes you have the requisite integrity for the task. An NDA and a preliminary project brief are attached. If the terms are agreeable, we would like to begin immediately. The initial consulting fee will be wide upon receipt of the signed NDA. Chloe opened the PDF attachment for the contract. She scrolled down to the consulting fee. Her eyes widened, and she had to read the number 3 times to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. The fee for this one project was more than she had earned in the entire last year. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a dream. This was real. And for the first time in a long, long time, Chloe Jensen felt the faint, unfamiliar flutter of hope. The Viridian Dynamics project was a baptism by fire. The startup was brilliant on a technical level. They were developing groundbreaking gene editing technology, but their branding was, as Nathaniel had allegedly put it, an unmitigated disaster. The logo looked like something from a 90s clip art gallery. Their website was a confusing mess of scientific jargon, and their mission statement was non-existent. They were geniuses who couldn't explain what they did to anyone who didn't have a PhD in molecular biology. Chloe threw herself into the work with a ferocity she hadn't felt in years. She lived and breathed Viridian Dynamics. She spent the first week doing nothing but research, interviewing the scientists, the engineers, the lab techs. She didn't just want to understand their product. She wanted to understand their passion, the why behind their work. She rented a small, dedicated office space with the advance from Caldwell Ventures, needing a clean slate away from the oppressive chaos of her apartment. The space was stark white with one large window overlooking a busy Manhattan street. It was her sanctuary and her war room. She covered the walls in mood boards, color palettes, and typographic studies. Her point of contact was the formidable Audrey Finch, Nathaniel Caldwell's executive assistant, who was more like a chief of staff. Ms. Finch was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp grey eyes and a demeanour that could curdle milk. She was precise, demanding, and utterly allergic to bullshit. Their first video call was terrifying. Mr. Caldwell does not abide failure, Ms. Jensen, Mr. Finch said, her voice devoid of warmth. He is trusting you with a significant asset in his portfolio. Do not make him regret it. But as the weeks went on, Chloe realized Ms. Finch's harshness was a whetstone. She demanded excellence, and in doing so, she forced Chloe to produce the best work of her life. Chloe sent over her initial concepts, a complete rebranding strategy. She proposed a new name, Helixora. It was sleek, modern, and evocative of their work. She designed a logo that was an elegant, abstract representation of a DNA strand, both scientific and artistic. She developed a tagline, Engineering Tomorrow's Cures. She expected a barrage of critiques. Instead, she got a one-line email from Ms. Finch. Mr. Caldwell is intrigued. Proceed to phase 2. For Chloe, that was the highest praise she could imagine. The project consumed her. She worked 18-hour days fueled by coffee and a burning desire to prove herself. She wasn't just designing a brand, she was telling a story. She crafted a narrative that transformed Helixor from a complex science project into a beacon of hope for humanity. The final presentation was to be delivered to Nathaniel Caldwell himself along with the Helixor board. Chloe flew to San Francisco, the trip and luxury hotel all arranged by Ms. Finch's office. She spent the entire night before pacing her hotel room, rehearsing her pitch until her voice was hoarse. This was it, the culmination of a month of sleepless nights. She walked into the Caldwell Ventures boardroom, a stunning space of glass and steel overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Nathaniel Caldwell stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning light. He turned as she entered, and his piercing blue eyes met hers. "Ms. Jensen," he said with a nod. "Welcome." He looked different than he had in the coffee shop, more formidable. He radiated an aura of immense power, yet his gaze was calm and focused entirely on her. The board members, a collection of serious-looking men and women, took their seats. Chloe felt a tremor of her old insecurity, the fear that she, the girl from Astoria, didn't belong here. Then she looked at her presentation loaded on the screen. She looked at the Helixor logo, a symbol she had created from nothing. And the fear subsided, replaced by a cold, clear confidence. She knew this brand better than anyone. She owned it. She began to speak. Her voice was steady as she walked them through her entire strategy, from the core philosophy to the color of the buttons on their future app. She didn't just present designs, she presented a vision. She showed them how this new brand would connect with investors, doctors, and eventually the patients whose lives they would save. When she finished, the room was silent. One of the board members, a skeptical-looking man named Dr. Alpert, cleared his throat. "It's very slick, Miss Jensen," he said, the word dripping with condescension. "But we are a serious scientific institution, not a lifestyle brand." Before Chloe could respond, Nathaniel spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "You are a failing institution, Robert. Your technology is revolutionary, but your inability to communicate its value has you on the brink of obscurity. You're hemorrhaging money because you can't inspire confidence. What Ms. Jensen has done is not slick. It's translation. She has translated your genius into a language the world can understand. It's the single most valuable asset you'll have in your Series B round." He turned his gaze to Chloe. "It's brilliant," he said simply. "We're implementing the entire strategy effective immediately. Audrey will handle the new contracts." The board was stunned into submission. After the meeting, as Chloe was packing her laptop, Nathaniel approached her. "I knew you had integrity," he said. "I didn't realize you were a visionary." "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," she stammered, overwhelmed. "Nathaniel," he corrected her gently. "I have another project I'd like to discuss with you. Several, in fact. It seems a number of my companies could use a dose of your vision." He paused, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "It would require you to start your own firm. I'd be happy to be your first client. And your seed investor." Chloe's mind reeled. Her own firm. Funded by Nathaniel Caldwell. It was an impossible dream taking shape right in front of her. I don't know what to say," she managed. "Say yes," he said, "and have dinner with me tonight. We can discuss the terms." That dinner was the beginning of everything. It wasn't a business meeting. They talked for hours, not about contracts and valuations, but about art, about books, about their childhoods. He was surprisingly open, telling her about his upbringing as a math prodigy who always felt more comfortable with algorithms than with people. He listened to her, truly listened, as she spoke about her passion for design, the way a perfect curve or a specific shade of blue could make her feel. He saw the parts of her that Kevin had dismissed as trivial and treated them as treasures. Over the next few months, their relationship blossomed alongside her new company. With his backing, she launched Jensen Creative. He was true to his word, sending a flood of high-profile projects her way from his portfolio. Her reputation grew at an exponential rate. She was no longer a freelance designer, taking gigs from content mills. She was the visionary branding strategist behind some of the tech world's most exciting new companies. She moved into a beautiful loft in Tribeca that served as both her home and her studio, a space she designed herself. She was successful, respected, and for the first time, truly happy. The ghost of Kevin Moss and his crushing verdict had finally begun to fade. One crisp autumn evening, Chloe found herself on Nathaniel's arm at the annual fundraising gala for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. A year ago, she would have been reading about this event on a gossip blog while eating takeout. Tonight, she was wearing a breathtaking midnight blue gown by Oscar de la Renta, a personal gift from Nathaniel. She felt a world away from the insecure girl who had been dumped in a fancy restaurant. Being with Nathaniel wasn't about the glamour or the money, though those were undeniable perks. It was about the way he looked at her as if she were the most fascinating person in the world. He valued her intellect, challenged her ideas, and celebrated her successes as if they were his own. He hadn't made her his queen. He had simply provided the resources for her to build her own damn castle. As they were speaking with a curator near a towering Jeff Koons sculpture, a familiar, unwelcome voice cut through the air. Chloe Jensen. "My God, is that you?" Chloe froze. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. That voice, a blend of feigned surprise and smug superiority, was seared into her memory. She slowly turned her expression carefully neutral. There he was, Kevin Moss, looking exactly the same in his tailored tuxedo, his face a mask of disbelief, and clinging to his arm was Brittany van der Sloot, dripping in diamonds and disdain. "Kevin," Chloe said, her voice cool and even. "What a surprise." Kevin's eyes raked over her from her elegant chignon to the designer gown that probably cost more than his car. He took in the confident set of her shoulders, the easy way she held her champagne flute. This was not the broken, weeping girl he had dismissed. He was visibly baffled. "I almost didn't recognize you," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You look well, very well. Freelancing must be paying better than I thought." The jab was subtle, but it was there. Before Chloe could reply, Nathaniel turned, placing a gentle hand on the small of her back. He extended his other hand to Kevin. "Nathaniel Caldwell, he said, his voice calm but resonant with authority, and Kevin's jaw practically hit the floor. He stared at Nathaniel, then back at Chloe, then at Nathaniel's hand on Chloe's back. The gears in his brain were grinding, trying to process an impossible reality. He shook Nathaniel's hand belatedly, his grip weak. Kevin Moss. I work at Goldman Sachs, he stammered. Chloe and I, we used to know each other. Ah, Nathaniel said, his expression unreadable. He looked at Chloe with a warmth that was clearly reserved just for her. Chloe is one of the most brilliant strategic minds I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Her firm, Jensen Creative, has single-handedly tripled the valuation of 2 of my portfolio companies this year alone. Kevin's face went pale. Jensen Creative. Her own firm? He had assumed she was here as someone's guest, a +1, not a power player in her own right. Brittany, sensing a shift in the social calculus, gave Chloe a saccharine smile. Jensen Creative. How lovely. It's always so nice when women have a little hobby to keep them busy. Chloe met her condescending gaze with a serene smile of her own. It's more than a hobby, Brittany. It's an empire. But I appreciate your support. She then turned her full attention back to Nathaniel, dismissing them completely. Darling, you were telling me about the new acquisition in the aerospace sector. The message was clear. Her conversation with Nathaniel Caldwell was important. Her conversation with them was not. Kevin and Brittany were left standing there flabbergasted. Kevin watched as Chloe and Nathaniel walked away laughing together, weaving effortlessly through a crowd of society's most elite. He had thrown her away, convinced she was a nobody, a liability to his ascent. Now here she was, arm in arm with a man who could buy and sell him 1,000 times over, a man who spoke of her with a reverence Kevin had never imagined. He hadn't just misjudged her. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. The encounter left Chloe slightly shaken, but not in the way she would have expected. It wasn't a resurgence of pain or heartbreak. It was the jarring feeling of looking at a ghost. Kevin was a relic from a past life, a life where she was small and apologetic. Seeing him now only highlighted how far she had come. Later that night, as they rode home in the quiet comfort of Nathaniel's chauffeured Maybach, he took her hand. Are you all right? He asked. I'm fine, she said, and she meant it. It was just strange, seeing someone who used to have so much power over my happiness and realizing they have none at all now. The only person who has power over your happiness is you, he said, lifting her hand to his lips. I'm just honored to be in its orbit. But Chloe knew the world wasn't that simple. People like Kevin and Brittany didn't just fade away. They saw her success not as an inspiration, but as an affront. And as they drove through the glittering streets of Manhattan, she couldn't shake the feeling that this ghost from her past was about to come back to haunt her. The encounter at the gala lit a fire under Kevin. It wasn't love or regret that fueled him, but a toxic cocktail of wounded pride and raw jealousy. In his world, people stayed in the boxes you put them in. Chloe was supposed to be in the nice girl but not good enough box, forever looking up at him. Instead, she had somehow leapfrogged him into the stratosphere. It was an intolerable offense to his ego. He began to obsessively track her success. He saw the articles in Forbes and Fast Company about Jensen Creative hailing Chloe as a branding prodigy. He saw her name on lists of 30 under 30 innovators. Every mention of her success was a fresh wound. Brittany was even more venomous. I don't get it. She'd complain over brunch at Balthazar. She's not that special. Caldwell must be funding her as a pet project. It's frankly pathetic how she's sleeping her way to the top. This seed of an idea that Chloe's success was not earned but given to her in exchange for her affection became their gospel. It was the only way they could reconcile her rise with their dismissal of her. They started whispering this narrative into the ever-receptive ear of New York's high society gossip mill. The first hint of trouble came in the form of a blind item on a notorious gossip site, Page 6, hinting that a reclusive tech titan was propping up his latest artistic muse's vanity business, blurring the lines between the boardroom and the bedroom. Chloe saw it and felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. It was vague, but she knew it was about her. Nathaniel, ever pragmatic, dismissed it. Chloe, people have been trying to smear me for decades. It's the price of success. Pay it no mind. Your work speaks for itself. But the whispers grew louder. At a product launch for one of her clients, a rival CEO made a snide remark to her, just loud enough for others to hear. Must be nice to have an investor who's so personally invested in your success. The poison was spreading. Brittany, using her social connections, made sure the rumors reached potential clients. A promising meeting with a luxury hotel chain was abruptly cancelled without explanation. Another potential client, a fashion label, chose a less qualified firm after their board expressed concerns about the optics of working with Jensen Creative. The attacks were insidious, impossible to fight head-on. They weren't questioning the quality of her work, which was undeniable. They were attacking her integrity, framing her as a kept woman whose success was unearned. It was a classic, misogynistic strategy, and it was starting to work. Chloe was frustrated and hurt. She had worked tirelessly to build her company, pouring every ounce of her creativity and intellect into it. To have it all dismissed as the whim of a rich boyfriend was infuriating. One evening, she was working late in her studio, wrestling with the gnawing anxiety, when Nathaniel arrived unannounced. He found her staring at a blank screen, her face etched with worry. "They're trying to ruin me," she said, her voice tight. "They're trying to turn my greatest achievement into a scandal." He came and stood behind her chair, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. "What you have built is real, Chloe. It's made of talent and steel. Their whispers are just air. We can't fight air, so we change the weather." "What does that even mean?" she asked, exasperated. "It means we create something so undeniable, so powerful, that it silences all the noise," he said. "I have a new project, my biggest one yet. The Caldwell Foundation is launching a global initiative to fund clean water technology in developing nations. It's a multi-billion-dollar endeavor, my life's work, my legacy, and I want Jensen Creative to be the exclusive branding partner." Chloe was speechless. This wasn't just another tech startup. This was a project that could change the world. It was also a massive risk for him. Tying his personal legacy project so publicly to her firm would either silence the critics for good or hand them the ammunition to destroy them both. "Why?" she whispered. "Giving this to me now, it will only fuel the rumors." He knelt beside her chair, turning her to face him. His blue eyes were intense, unwavering. "Because you are the best person for the job, period. Your ability to distill complex ideas into powerful human stories is exactly what this initiative needs. I will not allow the petty jealousies of small people to stop me from working with the most brilliant mind I know. I believe in your work, Chloe, and I believe in you. Let them talk. We have work to do." His faith in her was a shield. It extinguished her fear and ignited a fire of determination. She would not let Kevin and Brittany win. She would create a brand for this foundation so powerful and so pure that it would be untouchable. But Kevin had no intention of letting go. His obsession had taken a darker turn. He wasn't just gossiping anymore. He was digging. He used his corporate research tools and contacts to pry into the financials of Chloe's clients, looking for any weakness, any hint of impropriety. And in the complex web of venture capital and startups, he believed he had found something. A thread. A tiny, insignificant discrepancy in the early paperwork of the Helix Saw rebranding. It was nothing, a minor clerical error, but in the hands of a skilled manipulator, a thread could be woven into a noose. He was no longer just a ghost from her past. He was a hunter, and he was closing in. Kevin felt a thrill of triumphant malice. The thread he'd found was a small inconsistency in the initial funding transfer from a Caldwell Ventures subsidiary to Jensen Creative for the Helix Saw project. It was a simple routing error corrected within 24 hours by the accounting departments. But on paper, presented without context, it could be spun to look like a shell game, a way for Caldwell to funnel money to Chloe's new company off the books before it was officially incorporated. It was thin, but combined with the pervasive rumors, it was enough. His own position at Goldman Sachs had become precarious. He'd made a series of risky trades that hadn't paid off, and his superiors were watching him closely. He needed a big win, something to restore his golden boy status. His team had been working for months to secure a massive round of financing for a mid-stage tech logistics company, Axiom Freight. The deal was potentially worth hundreds of millions. The final hurdle was a presentation to the most sought-after investor on the street, Nathaniel Caldwell. Kevin saw his opening. It was perfect. He would not only secure his career but also humiliate Chloe and expose her as a fraud in front of her benefactor. His plan was twofold. First, his team would deliver the pitch for Axiom Freight. Then, at the end, he would pivot to a due diligence concern, presenting his evidence about the Helix Saw transaction, framing it as a risk and questioning the judgment of Caldwell's team and, by extension, Chloe. He would be the hero saving the great Nathaniel Caldwell from a gold-digging opportunist. The day of the presentation arrived. Kevin walked into the Caldwell Ventures boardroom, feeling like a conquering general. The room was just as Chloe had described it, an intimidating panorama of power. Nathaniel Caldwell sat at the head of the long table, flanked by his senior partners, including the hawk-eyed Audrey Finch. "Mr. Moss, welcome," Nathaniel said, his tone flat and businesslike. "We have a full schedule. Please begin." Kevin and his team launched into their polished presentation. The data was solid, the projections were optimistic. Kevin was in his element, confidently explaining market caps and logistical synergies. He felt the momentum building. He was winning. And that Kevin concluded with a flourish, is why Axiom Freight represents the premier investment opportunity in the logistics sector today. Nathaniel listened impassively, his fingers steepled. A competent presentation. However, we've identified some significant inefficiencies in your proposed supply chain model. Before we go any further, I'd like to bring in our external consultant who has been reviewing your data. She has a few suggestions. He nodded toward the door. It swung open and Chloe Jensen walked in. She was dressed in a razor-sharp dark grey power suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She held a tablet in her hand and moved with an aura of absolute command. She took a seat next to Nathaniel directly opposite Kevin. Kevin's blood ran cold. The air was sucked from his lungs. It was like a nightmare. He stared at her, his mouth agape. Chloe didn't even glance at him. Her focus was entirely on the presentation screen. "Mr. Caldwell, gentlemen," she began, her voice crisp and authoritative. While Axiom's core concept is viable, their logistical framework is archaic. They're relying on a centralized distribution model that creates significant bottlenecks. My team at Jensen Creative has run a counter-analysis. With a flick of her finger, the screen behind Kevin changed. It was now filled with her own charts, her own data models. They were cleaner, smarter, more advanced than anything his team had produced. By implementing a decentralized AI-driven network of micro-hubs, she continued, we can increase delivery efficiency by 40% and cut overhead by almost 30%. It's a more agile, scalable, and ultimately more profitable model. Axiom's current strategy isn't just inefficient, it's a liability. She systematically and dispassionately dismantled his entire pitch. She used their own data to expose their flaws, her logic irrefutable. She wasn't just a graphic designer, she was a brilliant strategist who had done more insightful work in a few days than his team had in months. The Caldwell Ventures partners were nodding, visibly impressed. Audrey Finch actually smiled. Kevin was humiliated, his entire professional credibility shredded in under 5 minutes by the woman he had called nothing. Rage and desperation clawed at his throat. He saw his career, his one chance, slipping away. He fell back on his pathetic plan. This is all very interesting, he sputtered, trying to regain control. But speaking of liabilities, Mr. Caldwell, during our own due diligence, we uncovered something concerning. A matter of financial integrity. He threw a file onto the table. This concerns the initial funding of Jensen Creative during the Helixor rebranding. We've found irregularities that suggest a potential conflict of interest. Funds being moved in a way that lacks transparency. He looked directly at Nathaniel, expecting shock concern. Instead, Nathaniel's expression turned to ice. Nathaniel didn't look at the file. He looked at Audrey Finch. Audrey, was this the clerical error from the sub-ledger you corrected on October 14th of last year? The very same, Nathaniel, she replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. The one that took my intern 7 minutes to identify and resolve. Nathaniel turned his glacial gaze back to Kevin. Mr. Moss, you come into my boardroom with a flawed proposal. My consultant, a woman whose firm I hired for her unparalleled strategic insight, corrects your work in a way that saves the potential deal. And in response, you choose to attack her character with a flimsy and desperate accusation based on a resolved, minute clerical error. He stood up, his full height seeming to dominate the room. You are not the kind of man I do business with. You are not smart enough to innovate, and you are not honorable enough to admit when you are outmatched. Instead, you try to tear down the person who is. The presentation is over. Your proposal is rejected. He looked at Kevin with utter contempt. And I would advise you to find a new line of work. I'll be making a call to your managing director at Goldman Sachs this afternoon to discuss the unprofessional nature of your due diligence. I imagine they will be very interested. It was an execution. Kevin sat there paralyzed as Chloe packed up her tablet, gave a polite nod to the board, and walked out without ever making eye contact with him. She didn't need to. Her victory was absolute. The last thing Kevin saw as he stumbled out of the boardroom in a daze was Nathaniel Caldwell, placing a proud protective hand on Chloe's shoulder as they walked down the hall, together, their quiet conversation echoing in the suddenly silent, cavernous space where his career had just died. The shockwave from Kevin Moss's career implosion radiated through Wall Street with the speed of a stock market crash. The story became a cautionary tale whispered over expensive lunches and after-work drinks, the arrogant banker who tried to play a king and got checkmated by a queen. As Nathaniel had promised, his call to the managing director at Goldman Sachs was brief and fatal. Kevin wasn't just fired, he was erased. His security pass was deactivated before he even made it back to his desk. Stripped of his title, his expense account, and the corporate armor that had defined him, he was suddenly terrifyingly exposed. His new reality was a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Fort Lee, New Jersey, with a view of a brick wall and the lingering smell of his neighbors cooking. The Zegnia suits hung in his closet like relics of a dead civilization. One rainy Tuesday night, he was mindlessly flipping through channels, a cheap beer in his hand, when a familiar face flashed onto the screen of a business news program. It was Chloe. She was being interviewed on a segment about the new faces of philanthropy. She looked breathtaking, not just because of her elegant, simple dress, but because of the light that seemed to radiate from within her. She spoke with effortless intelligence and passion about the Caldwell Foundation's Project Clearwater, explaining complex logistical challenges with a clarity that made them seem solvable. Ms. Jensen, the interviewer said, "You've done more than brand a foundation. You've created a global movement. What's the secret?" Chloe smiled, a genuine, warm expression that Kevin now realized he had rarely seen. "There's no secret," she replied. "It's about telling the truth. The technology is the hero of the story. The people doing the work are the heroes. My job was simply to build a stage big enough for the whole world to see them." The camera cut to footage of a new water purification plant in a village in sub-Saharan Africa. A banner with the elegant, hopeful logo she had designed fluttered in the breeze. Kevin watched as children drank clean water, their faces breaking into smiles. He felt a hollowness in his chest so vast it was almost a physical pain. He had looked at this woman and seen a liability, an accessory that didn't match his ambitions. He had failed to see the universe of talent and integrity right in front of him. He hadn't just lost a girlfriend, he had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of value itself. He picked up the remote and switched off the TV, but he couldn't switch off her image, radiant and powerful, a queen in a world he could no longer access. Meanwhile, Chloe's world was expanding. Jensen Creative now occupied 2 floors of a Tribeca high-rise, a space filled with light glass and the vibrant hum of creative energy. Her team, a carefully curated group of the brightest minds in the industry, revered her. She wasn't just a boss. She was a mentor who pushed them to do their best work while fiercely protecting their creative integrity. Her success was undeniable. The Project Clearwater launch had been a global phenomenon, silencing the whispers about her relationship with Nathaniel and cementing her reputation as a visionary. The very people who had once snubbed her, fueled by Brittany's gossip, now flooded her office with requests, hoping a little of her magic would rub off on them. She politely declined most of them, choosing instead to work with clients who aligned with her values, those focused on sustainability, education, and innovation. One evening, months after Kevin's spectacular downfall, she was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the city lights begin to sparkle against the twilight sky. The space was her sanctuary, her creation, from the custom-designed furniture to the art on the walls. It was her castle, built not of stone and mortar, but of talent, resilience, and an unwavering belief in her own worth. The glass doors slid open, and Nathaniel walked in. He was holding a single perfect white orchid. He rarely came to her office, always respectful of it being her domain, her kingdom. His presence filled the room with a quiet, comforting strength. "I just came from a UN briefing on Project Clearwater," he said, his voice filled with a deep, resonant pride. "They're fast-tracking our field operations in 3 countries because of the public response. The ambassador from Ethiopia specifically mentioned your media campaign. He said you didn't just ask for donations, you gave his people their dignity back. He said you did that." A warm glow spread through her chest. It was a team effort, a story that powerful just needed to be told. "All stories need a storyteller," he countered, stepping closer. He looked around her office at the awards gleaming on the shelves, at the bustling energy of her staff visible through the glass walls. "It feels like a lifetime ago, but do you remember that first day in the coffee shop?" She laughed softly. "I remember being terrified you were going to tell me my font was derivative." "I saw a spark," he said, his expression turning serious, his blue eyes searching hers. "A flash of brilliance where no one else was bothering to look. I've spent my life hunting for value, for potential, in algorithms, in companies, in markets, but the single greatest discovery I ever made was you, Chloe." He reached into his briefcase, but he didn't pull out a file. He pulled out a sleek black frame. Inside it was the original menu she had designed for Sal's coffee shop. He held it out to her. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is a masterpiece. Not because it hangs in a museum, but because you poured your soul into it for its own sake, for an old man who could only pay you in coffee. It has integrity. This isn't just paper and ink. It's proof that your character is constant, whether the reward is a free cappuccino or a billion-dollar valuation. It's the first thing I saw in you, and it's the thing I admire most." Chloe felt tears welling in her eyes as she took the frame. In that moment, she vividly recalled the cold, judgmental atmosphere of Per Se, the sting of Kevin's words dismissing her passions as worthless. He had offered her a silver bracelet, a token to close a chapter. Nathaniel was offering her a testament to her very soul. He then gently took the frame from her, set it on her desk, and got down on one knee. There in the heart of the empire she had built, he took her hand. His was warm and steady. "The world sees the queen on the throne now," he said, his voice low and earnest. "They see the awards and the magazine covers, but I was lucky enough to see the architect drawing the blueprints when no one was watching. I don't want to make you my queen, Chloe Jensen. You are already a queen. You built your own kingdom, forged your own crown. I'm asking if you would let me be your king, to stand by your side, to be your partner in everything, to build with you for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me?" The tears now flowed freely down her cheeks. They weren't the scalding tears of humiliation she had shed leaving that restaurant so long ago. They were tears of profound joy of being seen and loved, not in spite of her strength and ambition, but because of it. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid a stunning, elegant ring onto her finger. It wasn't a gaudy diamond meant to show off his wealth, but a sapphire the color of his eyes set in a unique modern design that looked like something she might have sketched herself. It was perfect. He stood and pulled her into his arms, and they stood together by the window, looking out at the glittering tapestry of the city. Her past had not defined her. A man's cruel dismissal had not been her epitaph. It had been the prologue. Kevin had thought she was nothing a stepping stone he could leave behind in the mud. He was wrong. She was never a stepping stone. She was a launching pad, and from the ashes of the world he tried to burn down, she had built a legacy written across the sky. Chloe's journey shows us that our worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. She was shattered by a man who saw her as an accessory, only to be found by a man who saw her as an equal, a partner, a force of nature in her own right. But her story isn't just about finding love, it's about finding herself. It's a testament to the incredible power of resilience, talent, and believing in your own vision, even when no one else does. She went from designing $10 logos in a tiny apartment to building a global brand that changed the world. Her ex thought she was nothing, but the billionaire didn't make her his queen. He simply recognized the one that was there all along. If her story of transformation and triumph moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear that their potential is limitless, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of overcoming adversity and building your own empire. What was your favorite twist in Chloe's story? Let us know in the comments below.